Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 33, I believe, of the Alec Lewis Show. That's a lot. Really appreciative of you guys being here, of listening. Last week's episode of Pete Bursich seemed like a lot of people really enjoyed that. And I talked to Pete, so we're going to do more of those down the line. And I appreciate him hopping on. It's fun to talk to somebody who watches the film and I think thinks about this stuff as much as I try to. So really appreciate you guys being here. If you don't know me, my name's Alec Lewis. I cover the Vikings for The Athletic, do a couple of these podcasts a week. You can find us on YouTube, on Apple, on Spotify, on iHeart, a lot of the places that you get your podcast. We will be here multiple times a week. Talking about the game, the season, bringing in guests, have had a couple players thus far. Looking to do more of that and have some staffers at some point here down the line. But it's been really fun, and I'm not going to waste much time. We're going to get into it, as I usually do early in the week. Going to give you 5 thoughts. But before I do that, going to take some questions that I asked from Twitter. So if you aren't following me at Alec_Lewis, please do that. You'll see the call every now and then for questions and got a bunch of them. So I'm going to hop into that. I did want to say, I mean, for you guys that are listening, whether you went to Nashville or not, I just want you to know that showing of Vikings fans at Nissan Stadium and in that city on Broadway was unlike anything I've experienced for a team that I've covered, and really pretty rare for a regular season game that I know of any sports team, in terms of the amount of away team fans in that city and at that place. That was mind-blowing. I'll give you a story. So I went out Saturday night, the night before the game. I was on Broadway and having a good time, of course, as you might expect. Was at the bar Tootsie's on Broadway. It was jam-packed in there. I mean, like, I described, my friends know this, but I describe it always as like being in a lobster tank. I mean, there's nowhere to move at all whatsoever. And I'm upstairs, probably on the 3rd floor. And as I'm up there, the Vikings fans up on that 3rd floor start doing the skull chant. And I'm standing next to this guy at the bar, and he's like, what is going on? This guy is probably a Nashville native. He went downtown with some friends or his girlfriend or something like that. And now he's got people raising their hands and doing claps, and he's got no idea what's going on. And so one of his friends like, yeah, these are Vikings fans. They do the skull chant. This guy was blown away that there were the amount of people from Minnesota in this bar the night before having as much fun as they were having. And I mean, what my take, it's like, for people who don't know, I mean, these Minnesota sports fans, you guys listen to this, are ridiculously impressive. I mean, really. The lower bowl at Nissan Stadium was almost jam-packed purple Vikings fans. The week before, Jacksonville, you couldn't even spot a Jacksonville fan because there were so many. So, like Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, they always talk about, we're thankful for the fans. We've got the best fan. But, like, genuinely, it has been unbelievably impressive this year during a season I mean, I can't even sugarcoat it. Like, entering the season, there were not a ton of expectations, specifically after JJ McCarthy tore his meniscus. So props to you guys, whether you were there or not. You are a part of it, and I wouldn't just say that. I mean, I've genuinely been blown away, not only from the time I've been here, but also specifically the last 2 weeks in terms of the travel that some of these Vikings fans have undergone. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to get to some questions, and I'm just going to roll through them real quick, then get to my 5 thoughts. Some of these are Vikings related. Some of these are personal related. You guys are going to have to sit through all of them, and I appreciate you doing that. Hopefully we'll have a little fun. Eric Nordquist, he is the producer of Paul Allen's show on KFAN every weekday. He asked, how was Jersey Mike's today? I didn't go to Jersey Mike's today because I know I'm probably going to go Thursday or Friday. Instead, I went for the very healthy option of Chick-fil-A, and I got a salad at Chick-fil-A, which makes me probably the weirdest person in the world. You guys are probably laughing, throwing the phone, changing the podcast, hearing that I got a salad at Chick-fil-A, but I was trying to be somewhat healthy. The Jersey Mike's is going to come down later down the pike. So Nordo, I sorry to disappoint you, but you know it's coming. on a similar question, can we get player comps of Jersey Mike's sandwiches? So for you guys, this has become a thing. I love Jersey Mike's. Like, love probably doesn't do it justice. Find someone who loves you the way I love Jersey Mike's, you'll probably be in very, very good shape. But I started one of my first episodes recording this podcast talking about how much I adore those subs, and they put a Jersey Mike's right near the Vikings facility, which has been a disaster for my intestinal health and fortitude. Though I guess the fortitude has allowed me to overcome. Player comps of Jersey Mike's sandwiches. I mean, I don't know. The whole defense is just, I mean, rock solid. It is whatever item on the menu that you think is underrated that doesn't get talked about enough, whether it's the club sub, whether it is the 43. Maybe that's too popular. I don't really, maybe the 43 is JJ McCarthy. I don't really know. I sound like an absolute, I know I'm off the rails already. But the defense, and specifically, let's just hand it, I'll just tie it to the defensive line. Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Bullard, Jalen Redmond, Jerry Tillery. These guys are the underrated aspect of whatever item on the menu you think is most underrated. I will tell you a story. I was in Jersey Mike's pretty recently. You guys will like this. I mean, we're here. Might as well tell stories like these. And the one near the facility, and they're asking me, Vikings, what are you asking about? What are you thinking? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you guys ever get any players in here? And they're like, yeah, there's one player who comes in 2 times a week and gets 6 bags of spicy pickle chips every time he comes in. And he's come in with friends to get spicy pickle chips. And he's come in with family to get spicy pickle chips. There is a player on this Vikings team who deserves a sponsorship more than I do for their love of the Miss Vicky spicy pickle chips at Jersey Mike's. I'm glad I could bring that story to you guys. Do with that what you will. Guess who it is? I will not reveal that person unless they want to reveal themselves. Questions. Getting back to them. Trevor Laxon, he reads and watches and I see him on Twitter all the time. I always appreciate his support. He asks, what late round rookies are pushing to get a look, or if injuries happen, could step up? I don't know if any of them are really likely to play down through the back half of this season. And I'm talking about the Dwight McGlothern's, the Levi Drake Rodriguez, the Michael Juergens, and Walter Rouse. I mean, those 4 guys are probably the names that I'm intrigued on. And if I'm missing somebody, that's because I'm revved up on coffee. So I'm probably just missing that person's name. But I've got my eyes specifically on those offensive linemen. Walter Rouse, just a phenomenal guy to talk to in the locker room. Very cerebral, very smart. Like, you guys could sit down with him for 20 minutes and you'd be like, man, I love that guy. Like, he's just a very impressive dude. And from people I talked to at Oklahoma, that was the expectation. But he's a big guy. He played tackle in college. He worked a little bit at guard in training camp. So where he ends up residing is going to be interesting to me. That's a guy I would watch. Maybe not for this year, but in the time to come. And then, I mean, I Levi Drake Rodriguez and Dwight McGlothern. Dwight McGlothern, there have been times after practice where I see him chopping it up one-on-one with Justin Jefferson. They're asking about routes, and probably Dwight playing some of the scout team stuff and being able to give Justin looks. But like, for Justin to spend that time with Dwight, for Dwight to want to ask questions of Justin, just I like his energy. I've liked what I've seen from him. I think a year to just kind of sit and watch and observe and train with this training staff is going to be really good for him. So if down the line we're talking about Dwight McGlothern as mixing in because of his ball skills, because of his want to learn, that just wouldn't surprise me at all. And had a little bit of a reconnection. So hopping right back in here. Hope we're still good. Appreciate the question, Trevor. Let's see. Odelay at Devil's Haircut 10 asks, is Aaron Jones healthy? I had a similar question. In week 5, he obviously hurt his hamstring. It was initially deemed a hit, but it was his hamstring. He didn't miss a game. And then against Jacksonville, he got hit in the ribs with a helmet. And so I kind of wondered too, like, is he nursing some stuff? He maybe doesn't look the same. I'll tell you, through The Athletic, we have this advanced data site, True Media, and I can look at like a guy's average speed and average max speed in a game he plays. And going back to my time covering baseball, I used to talk to some of the performance science people, and they always say, like, one way to deem whether a guy has is at the optimal level is to look at, is he averaging the same speed around the bases, was the baseball term, but with football, like, is he averaging the same type of juice on the field in game? And if you're looking at all those metrics through next gen stats, I mean, Aaron Jones' top miles per hour, I think this past weekend was like 19.37, which was higher than a couple games ago. So either he is trending back up, he hasn't wavered. I mean, it's a fair question because of the run game struggles. I wrote earlier this week that since week 5, the Vikings had the lowest yards per carry in the NFL. So something to watch for sure. Sam Olsen, another guy who reads and listens and watch, and I always appreciate him interacting. He has potential Brian Flores replacements if he gets a head coaching job. I mean, how I'll answer this question initially is on merit in terms of what Brian Flores has built defensively over a year and now a little more over than a year and a half now. He is deserving of that job. He's deserving of interviews at the very least. Whether he gets one or not is obviously going to be dependent on a lot of factors, some outside of his control from the team's perspective, and then some under his control in terms of, would he rather work for an owner in a general manager executive structure that he doesn't prefer, or would he rather work in this environment that has given him the latitude to make a lot of decisions, to have a lot of say defensively, and to make as much money as he's made and as he'll obviously continue to make here locally? Like, there's a lot of questions in terms of replacements if that time were to come, and we're a long ways from that time coming, or we may not be, but it's purely speculative. Like, I think the two internal options whose names I would expect to come up pretty quickly would be Mike Saravo, the linebackers coach, and then Durante Jones, the DB's coach and defensive pass game coordinator. I mean, both those guys called plays in the preseason. Both are very sharp. Both have college experience where they are willing to go seek and pull from their backgrounds the way that Flores is to be creative. They both have a presence about them. I've spent time with both of them, and they are easy to talk to. They are easy to get behind. Durante, I believe, had interviews to be the DC in New York last offseason cycle. So he was the DC at LSU years ago. So and Mike Saravo was in Carolina with Phil Bennett, had been at Baylor. So both these guys have bounced all over the place. And then there's a lot of options just along the staff of guys who could replace those roles. Like if Durante were to ascend, then you'd have a guy, Michael Hutchings, who is very close to a lot of the DBs. He would probably fill that role. So there are and at linebackers coach, I mean, if Mike Saravo were to ascend, the assistant linebackers coach, Thad Bogertis, is highly respected around the league and internally. So they've done a good job, I would say an underratedly good job of building the depth from a defensive staff standpoint, and that stuff cannot be overstated. It goes along with what I wrote after last weekend, that I feel like the infrastructure of this team, regardless of what happens through the back half of this season, should give you guys like a very good feel about where this thing is trending and directing. So those are names internally. I mean, Matt Daniels, the special teams coordinator, was a DB in college at Duke. He has a real presence about him. I see him as a head coaching candidate down the line somewhere. He's done a great job with this special teams staff, in my opinion, special teams unit, in my opinion, given the resources that they've been given. So, I don't know if he would make that jump if he has the bandwidth. I don't know, but I think as much as you can cite the work that a lot of these staffers have done, it's probably worthwhile to do it. And you guys are asking questions like this, so you are in tune enough to want to know the impact that these guys are making. That's why I provide it. David Linder asked, what can we do to keep flow? I mean, again, Pete Bursis said it last week, but what he's been able to do in terms of maximizing the salary cap space, the moves they've made, I mean, it has gone beyond the surplus value that they've generated with him as the defensive coordinator. Like, you've got so many guys with 6+ sacks. Pat Jones has put in a lot of work. I give him a lot of credit for what he's put in, but this scheme creates pressure, and pressure is worth a lot of dollars on the free agent market, meaning Brian Flores is worth a lot of dollars. So, I mean, what can you do? You pay him what he deserves, which is a lot of money. And I mean, they've given him the latitude from a personnel perspective, from a who plays on Sundays perspective. And as long as that is there, I mean, you're giving him as much as you can give him until the carrot of wanting to become a head coach again that exists for Brian Flores becomes a realistic opportunity. Zach, can you give your take on the hit on Addison in the end zone that was called for unnecessary roughness? I mean, in real time, I got to be honest, I thought it was a penalty. I thought it was like a vicious hit, and the intent of the rules and the way that refs call games, it kind of made sense to me. Now, on replay, I get it. It's a physical game. You got to allow these guys to play football. If you're going to play the game, you're going to have to allow some physicality. That's just part of it. And I will say, like, the Vikings almost got rewarded for a Sam Darnold throwing decision that I didn't think was the best. I mean, threw it into double coverage. They love those, backside routes in the red zone. He's thrown multiple touchdowns this year off those, but that one was not open. And Jordan Addison paid for it. And ultimately the Vikings obviously benefited after the penalty. But I thought Brian Callahan, the Tennessee Titans head coach, had a real reason to be as frustrated as he was. Jordy Von Blurm, what does Chris O'Hara's role look like now that McCown has taken over his former role of quarterbacks coach? This is an in-the-weed question. I appreciate it. Chris O'Hara, he partakes in multiple game plan, kind of pregame study, charting, and kind of like third down, red zone type plan. He's involved in those discussions. He is still a voice that you see him out there every day talking to Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips and, Ryan Cordell and Brian Angelico and a bunch of guys on staff. So, that's what I would say. Let's see what else we've got, if there is anything else. John, good question here. What do you think happens with the safety room after this season? I think Bynum has played himself up from a luxury piece to must sign plus super popular dude. That's John's comment. It's a great question. I mean, obviously you start with Harrison Smith. Like, there have not, I mean, he had the game sealing interception last week, but from like a splash play element, like I would say you don't see him every week, but like this guy plays every snap. He's durable. He makes the right checks at the right times. He's the calming presence on the defense. I've heard Paul Allen say that he and Blake Cashman are like the heart and soul. If they're two guys that fit those descriptions, and I would completely agree with them. Like Harrison Smith's locker room vibe, on field, like calm, all that stuff is massive. So the question starts with like, does he want to play again? And honestly, as long as he is playing at this level and impacting the game at this level and having as much fun as he has, and I think a big part of it's going to be if Brian Flores is still around, he's going to have that urge to continue wanting to play for Flo because they have a great respect for one another. That's where I'd start. And then, I mean, Cam Bynum, I've written this and I've reported this, but there were conversations regarding an extension with Bynum's representatives at Clutch Sports leading up to the start of the season. It felt like Cam Bynum wanted that to happen, but it felt like he and his representatives also felt like he was deserving of a certain dollar amount. And the Vikings have they're going to have a lot of salary cap space and a lot of routes that they can go. Like, do you pay interior offensive linemen? Do you pay interior defensive linemen? Do you pay cornerbacks? Do you draft at those positions? Javon Holland's going to be a free agent. He's a safety with familiarity with Flo in Miami. There's just a lot going on. I think Brian Flores and this defensive staff respects the heck out of Cam Bynum. They really appreciate what he's done. He has been durable. He has been available. You could talk to players in that locker room. He's as smart as they come in terms of the structure of the defense and what they're trying to do. And after every practice, I kid you not, he leaves the locker room and he goes in the indoor and he does certain drop drill, like all by himself. He's got a couple other players that follow him in doing that. Just like when I think of Minnesota Vikings locker room guys, like he is kind of the embodiment of what they've got. It's a lot of really aware, really good, really sharp, and just like very, very guys who want to maximize their ability. That's Cam Bynum. So I think bringing him back is definitely an option. Again, I think Harrison Smith, it's a major question. There are going to be some free agents in that regard. So you'll just see. I think Theo Jackson they believe in. So would he ascend to having a full-time role? How would Josh Metellus be used if one of them were to leave? Like it's a lot to sort through. So it's a good question, John. And I know my answer hasn't been so strict, but I hope you take away they love both of these guys. I think the ideal for them, even as Harrison Smith is older, is to keep both those guys. It's going to be probably a cost-dependent situation on both sides. How much are the Vikings willing to give? How much is Cam Bynum willing to want to be in Minnesota? And then kind of how are they going to allocate resources elsewhere? So that's what I'd say. Last question, then I'll get to my 5 thoughts and get out of here. But I know, let's see, and let's see here. Nick asked, I know ownership has said they won't extend KOC or Kwesi during the season, but I doubt they expected an 8-2 start. What gives? Well, I mean, I've written this. So, I mean, whether this gets aggregated or not, like, I mean, again, it's not something new, but with what Kevin O'Connell specifically has done, and I include Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in this as well, I mean, their leverage just has gone up. I mean, the reality is the Vikings executive decision not to extend either key figure of this organization last offseason was kind of, I mean, it's you want to wait and see what happens, but it's just like extensions with players. If you don't extend a player and he goes out like Cam Bynum and has a great year, the price goes up. And I mean, like you talk to people around the league, and I do more about Kevin O'Connell because he's just, he's there every day. I cover him every day. He gives press conferences 3 days a week. Like this guy, I mean, the respect that he has from people around the league in terms of his leadership ability, the way he has built this culture. I mean, like there have been players asking in terms of like what gives. So it's not the question is right, but I mean, again, these two guys with what they've done, they're going to have leverage. I mean, I think everybody internally appreciates what they've done. And so the Vikings are going to have to meet that leverage wherever it ends up, rising, whatever level it ends up rising to. But, I mean, yeah, it's nobody expected 8-2. And like I've written this countless times, but the teams that have the same or better records than the Vikings right now are paying their quarterbacks approximately $45 million a year. The Vikings are paying their quarterback $10 million a year. And usually that would mean you have a lot of space to spend elsewhere, but the Vikings didn't this year because they absorbed $68 million in dead cap. So what they're doing with the constraints, both in terms of quarterback, like ceiling and in terms of, like in terms of salary cap space elsewhere, it's wildly impressive, and all credit goes to those guys and Brian Flores. They should all see raises and extensions. I mean, if they don't, something crazy. I mean, that I think we will all have a lot of questions asked. What I would say. So yeah. Those are some mailbag questions. If I didn't get to yours, I apologize. And if you throw it in the comments on YouTube, I will get to them. So if I didn't get to them, do that, comment down below, and I'll get to them. And while we're at it, while you're looking down below, while you're going to comment down below, please hit the subscribe button right there. Takes 2 seconds, doesn't do anything for you, but it definitely helps us out. It gets more people watching, and would really appreciate you guys doing that. If you're listening elsewhere, rate and review. That stuff kind of populates the podcast more, and hopefully you can tell how much I love doing it. So the more people we can reach, the more people we can bring in, the more conversations we can have, I think the better. And the more that listen, the more willing, probably, the more active we'll be over here. So that's where we'll go. I'm going to give 5 thoughts, and I'm not going to go as long as I typically do because we went so long with the questions. We went long enough. It was fun to do it. But let's start with Sam Darnold. My first thought is, this guy was a primary reason that the Vikings won the game on Sunday. And I don't know how many times this year we've been able to say that, but his pocket movement and what he was doing. I mean, Wes Phillips called him Houdini. I thought it was like the Matrix in terms of him ducking, covering, moving, spinning. I was thinking of Kevin Harlan using a heck of a different amount of adjectives: spinning, moving, twirling, floating. I mean, it was like he was doing all of that relentlessly in the pocket, and there was pressure coming from everywhere. It was coming around the edge from edge rushers, from cornerbacks, from Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat, who probably gave the Vikings interior nightmares over the last couple of days in the time since the game because of how impressive they were. But Sam Darnold was just, I mean, I thought the pocket movement was wildly impressive. Thought his accuracy for most of the day was really, really good. I mean, that ball placement on the dagger cut to Jordan Addison on the 47-yard touchdown, I mean, that's as good as you can do it. I mean, even when he was scrambling and moving, like there was, I thought it was interesting, like things kind of idled a little bit right at a half, but I thought a really critical play that almost turned the momentum in the Titans' favor was on a third down. Sam Darnold scrambles left, and he finds Jordan Addison on the move, and Jordan Addison, the ball's maybe a little behind Jordan Addison, but you got to catch that as he's sliding to the ground, and that was a third down play, and they had to punt. And so, I mean, the Jalen Naylor what did Darnold's stats look like if he hits Jalen Naylor for 50 yards? He throws for 303 touchdowns with the rushing touchdown, and across the league, people are raving about the game. Other 247, 2 touchdowns, no one's really talking about it. There were plays he made scrambling where pre-snap, the Titans showed zone or man, and then post-snap, they dropped into zone after showing man, or they played man after showing zone. And instead of forcing the ball into windows, I thought Sam Darnold was really smart, and he would escape or he would scramble for 3. There was a scramble for 5 that allowed them to convert a fourth down. Just, I mean, that you want to talk about quarterbacks lifting the bar as opposed to just meeting the bar. Like, I thought that's what he did Sunday. And that's a good defense. More of that down the stretch, and there is going to be a team that and maybe it's Minnesota, but maybe it's elsewhere that ponies up because they think he can give them better quarterback play than they've had. So, yeah, I mean, I mentioned this play earlier, but the one play that actually there were 2 that scared me. One was the red zone throw that obviously was penalized to Jordan Addison on the backside route that I mentioned earlier. And the other one was the Jordan Addison play where he got hit in the side of the hip on the sideline. Sam Darnold looked like he thought it was kind of a quarters coverage and that there was going to be some space, or a read coverage where there's going to be space on the sideline. Instead, the cornerback fell off, and that could have been another interception. So it wasn't perfect, but I thought his pocket movement were really good. I will also say in the it wasn't perfect aspect, like, I mean, again, and as you're being really nitpicky, and I feel like I did after week 1 in New York. It was like he played well. Yes, there were a couple throws. Like, there were a couple times watching the film back where I felt like, Sam Darnold's front side, he's looking to the right. If he can just reset his feet and get backside, here comes Justin Jefferson over the middle of the field in what would be an explosive game. As I imagine, as the Viking staff is going back through the film with Sam and they're analyzing stuff, like, it's like, if we could just get to that backside third read. Some quarterbacks can do it more consistently than others. It's asking a lot. And he was so good anyway that, again, I know I'm nitpicking and saying this, but it really, and truthfully, I always think it's interesting when people question play calling. If you go back and look at some of these plays, you'll see that there is even more to be had probably. It's just not always going to be found. And that's the name of the game. It's a hard league. Defensive players get paid too. And now I should get paid because I'm talking like a coach with the cliches I'm using. But just overall, Sam Darnold pocket movement, wildly impressive. And I thought it was clearly one of his best games that probably he's ever played in the NFL, but definitely since I've watched him here. Thought number 2, the run game wasn't good. I know the Vikings internally did not, they knew it was going to be extremely difficult against that front with Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat and Harold Landry and Arden Key. I mean, those guys, that's the identity of their defense. That's the identity really of their team right now. That's where they spend a lot of their resources in terms of picks, in terms of money to Jeffrey Simmons. So it's not going to be a surprise, but I mean, I wrote about this earlier for Tuesday, but it's like the Vikings have tried everything with the run game. They have had 3 different starting running backs. They've signed a blocking tight end who's been really good in Josh Oliver, no question. They've changed schemes, going more from zone type stuff to implementing a little more gap, double team, vertical runs to try to kind of generate more push with multiple players on the front. They've prioritized ball security. They've talked relentlessly, used the phrase play style, which is just, we need to be more physical. I mean, they have they've shuffled left guards. They've shuffled right guards. They've given opportunity to Blake Brandel. They traded Ezra Cleveland for Dalton Reisner, and they benched Ed Ingram for Dalton Reisner. It's been, I mean, really everything at the wall, see what sticks. And the reality is the numbers, not just Sunday, but over the span of this season thus far, look very, very similar to the first 2. And so for me, it leaves one real lever that you have left to pull, and that is upgrading the interior of the offensive line. I mean, I've enjoyed getting to know Blake Brandel. Garrett Bradbury's been phenomenal to me since I got to Minnesota. And I think there are times during all of these games where it's like, man, that was a great climb up to the second level by Garrett Bradbury. Ooh, that was not an easy reach block, and he was able to make that happen. But then there are other times where it feels a little leaky. The guys get pushed back. And so often after every game, you're like, man, the run game could have given more. We got to be a little more technical. And if you're having to say that over and over and over, like I used to think about this with baseball and lineups. How many ifs do you have? If you have a lot of ifs, there's probably a reason. Like if you're having to say, if we could just be a little bit better over and over and over, it's an indication that maybe you're just not going to be better given the circumstances that you have. And so, I think this offseason, whether it is through the draft with a premium draft resource or whether it is allocating the free agent money that they're going to have, I just specifically at right guard, it's a spot to me that just needs filling. And then the other spots we'll see. So the run game was not good. They didn't expect it to be good against Sunday against the Titans. But at some point, it can't always just be those guys are menaces on the other side, because guess what? The Colts had him in DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. The Ravens have it in Justin Madubuike. The Bears are not phenomenal up front, but Andrew Billings, this guy can give you some problems. I mean, you go through Kenny Clark with the Packers, Ali McNeil with the Lions. Like, they all have them. So it can't always be those guys are going to just wreak havoc and it's going to be tough sledding. Like, at some point, you got to move those guys. And I think there are times where the Vikings interior offensive line does that. You just probably would like to see more consistency over time. So that's point number 2. This is tangentially related, but Jeffrey Simmons, I mean, boy, would it be nice to have a guy like that who is just an absolute, wrecking shot. I mean, this guy's like the Hulk in terms of what he was doing, like a super villain defensively. When you see that guy, it is not fun. The guy was unbelievable. And I thought Tavondre Sweat, who was, I believe, a second-round pick out of Texas, he's had some off-the-field stuff. I think the question for him, exiting the draft was, can this guy give the type of energy and consistency that you need to excel? Because he is 340, 350, but he has a level of pass rush wiggle that it showed itself on Sunday. So for the Vikings to get that type of guy, it's going to be on the priority list, obviously. But it was interesting because, like, this point was going to be, this third thought I had was going to be, man, it would be nice to have a guy like Simmons. And that's a fine point. It's probably pretty good for the Alec Lewis show, but better, it comes off a question that someone asked me in the story I wrote was, how much are we spending on interior players? Because if we're not spending a ton, then does it even make sense to be better than the Vikings are? And I thought that was a great question. And I looked it up on Over the Cap, and they have, if you're a subscriber to that website, which does a phenomenal job keeping up with the salary cap, they have certain toggles where you can look at how much each team is spending on each specific position. So it's an awesome resource. And I looked this up. The average NFL spending on the 3 interior line positions and the 2 starting defensive tackles is approximately like $41 million. That's just average. Some teams pay $20 million to one of those 5 spots. The Viking, again, averages $41 million. On all 5 spots, the Vikings are spending approximately $20 million. So less than half of average of what other teams are spending. Now, that's partly what you have to do when you're spending at receiver, the way they are with Justin Jefferson and the way they've used draft capital with Jordan Addison. When you're spending at tackle with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill, when you're spending at tight end with TJ Hockenson, and when you're using the rest of your free agent space on a lot of defensive players because you haven't drafted exceptionally well to replace players with young and promising options with surplus value, then you kind of have to take a hit somewhere, and it becomes these interior spots. And again, let's not lose sight of the fact they're 8-2 doing this, so the strategy is actually worked in a interesting capacity. But I mean, it's also the reality of if you don't have players that you drafted, like Ed Ingram does not become a bona fide starter where he's giving you $10 million worth of performance at $2 million worth of cost, then it becomes really tough sledding. So I guess I'm glad the commenter asked me that, because it proved to me, and to the commenter's question, it proved him right, and that the Vikings are spending half really of average what teams are spending on the interior. So to expect leaps and bounds beyond production, it just doesn't make sense, specifically with the fact that they have not drafted bona fide players at either spot. That's what I'd say. That's thought number 3. It's just it's interesting to look at where, how the resources have been spent and then how it's shook out. So that's what I'd say. 4th thought, the Ed Ingram benching, to me, it was kind of just inevitable. I wrote a prediction story at The Athletic kind of halfway through the season, just given 10, or I don't know, might not have been 10, might have been 8 things I thought would happen. One of those was him being benched. It was kind of just at what point are the Vikings ready to just pull the plug? And I thought Dalton Risner was okay. It's hard to transition from a spot you've played your whole career, and he's played at left guard his whole career, to right, and then have to face Jeffrey Simmons in that first opportunity. Like, that's not the best. That's not the easiest ask of anybody. But I mean, with Ed Ingram, it's the baseball analogy that I always use. Like, you could be a pretty effective pitcher, or not. You could be a fine starting pitcher, a number 5 in the rotation, where you throw strikes and you've got a 92-mile-an-hour fastball, and there are days where you can look pretty good. But that pitcher is often going to give up a 3-run home run. It's going to give up 6 runs in 4 innings, and it's going to tax your bullpen. And that to me was like Ed Ingram. The stats were brutal. I mean, all the advanced metrics in terms of his production were not good. But anecdotally, it always felt like he could give you okay run in both phases throughout some of the game, but ultimately there were going to be multiple plays in the game that were just disasters and potentially catastrophic. And I mean, we've seen over 3 years that the identity of this Vikings offense is its passing game. Dalton Risner is a better pass protector than Ed Ingram. So it's the benching was inevitable. That was part of the thought. The other thought is, like, the 2022 draft. I mean, it stings, and this is like, it's just the reality. I'm not taking shots. I mean, the Vikings regime got in. Neither Kevin O'Connell or Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and this is not me taking up for them. It's just the reality. Like, their prior roles had nothing to do with studying draft prospects for a long time. So they were kind of new to that class, and then they were working with the new defensive coordinator, Ned Donato. There was a lot going on, but the reality, I mean, it doesn't excuse the reality. The job is to get picks right, even though it is a very uncertain process. And other than Jalen Naylor, I mean, very few have meaningful roles right now. And then Jalen Naylor dropped the obvious 50-yard touchdown pass, and then also dropped a what would have probably been a touchdown in the red zone in a key moment in Los Angeles. So, yeah, I mean, the lack of hits in that draft, especially defensively, sting. And it's part of the reason why the interior, it's all a domino effect, because none of those defenders, the Lewisines, Andrew Booth, Brian Asamoah, Caleb Evans, have transitioned into like impactful starters. The Vikings have had to use their salary cap space on defensive players, which takes away the available space that you can use on the interior of the offensive line. Again, it's all this puzzle piece that all works together. And then the 5th thought, I can't say enough, and I hope you picked up on it early in the podcast, about what Brian Flores and this defense have done with the constraints from a roster perspective that they have. I mean, what they've done stopping the run in terms of Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Bullard, Jalen Redmond, Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel on the edge, Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace, and even the cornerbacks and their willingness to stop the run. It's been the best in the NFL against good offenses. So that's not just like some cherry pick stat. But I'm still, what I would say is I'm still cautious and I'm not scared. I'm not sounding some crazy alarm. It's not a dig at anybody. The numbers are the numbers. The Vikings are giving up an explosive play rate in the passing game 16% of the time. That's 24th in the NFL. When they are not in long down, when they have not gotten offenses in long downs and distances, the quarterback doesn't have to hold the ball as much, which means the pressure is less likely to get there, which means there's more, there's a clear window to find pockets and zones. And that's just always going to be the reality unless you can play a ton of man coverage, which this Vikings defense doesn't for reasons that make sense with their cornerbacks and some of the age of their cornerbacks. But I'd say I'm a little cautious about the pass defense. I'm looking forward to watching it against, this week in Chicago, but really more so against the Cardinals, against the Falcons, teams that have older quarterbacks that don't get, and maybe Kyler and Kirk will totally, mentally stressed by all of the protection stuff they have to sort through, and teams that their protection units are better than what we just saw from the last two, where the Jacksonville Jaguars and Tennessee Titans were giving up pressures through the A gaps. Teams like that can deal with protection and can keep a quiet mind at quarterback, to me, might be able to find space over the middle the way that the Lions and Rams did. So we'll see. I mean, having Blake Cashman back, maybe that mitigates that. And I maybe the Vikings take different strategies against those teams. So I'm looking forward to watching that stuff. I just thought it was important to iron it out. Those are the 5 thoughts. Quickly, I'll run them down again. Sam Darnold, pocket movement in that game, wildly impressive. You could nitpick certain aspects, but I just got, like, what he did in that game, I was really impressed by. The run game against Tennessee, not good. In general, I think the run game since week 5, lowest yards per carry in the NFL. They've pulled a lot of levers. The obvious one at this point for this upcoming offseason is upgrading on the interior. Jeff Simmons, man, it would be nice to have a guy like that. But reality is, as I talked about through a lot of this podcast, the interior of the offensive line and defensive line, the Vikings are spending about half NFL average on those positions for a lot of different reasons. And so the production that they've gotten, I mean, you probably got to give them credit for that. Like, and again, I don't want to tie everything to the money you spend, but I mean, the NFL is a pretty solid league in terms of scouting professional play. Like, they know what players are worth what value to a pretty fine scale. And so to be spending half of average, but getting the production that they're getting, it's probably what you should expect. And that's probably why it's not perfect on either side. So I don't know. That thought has me very intrigued. Fourth thought, the Ingram bitching felt inevitable. And the 22 draft and where it stands, it stings. And I think it has a cascading effect on everything else. And then 5, the defense, again, I don't want to take anything away from what they've done, because the Vikings would not be 8-2 without them. You guys would not be traveling probably as much as you guys are, having as much fun on Sundays as you guys are without the way they play. But I'm watching that pass defense, specifically against better protection units, which might not be this weekend against the Bears, and more experienced quarterbacks. So that's that. That's the 5 thoughts. And that's going to do it, I think, for the Tuesday episode of the Alec Lewis Show. I was rolling. I don't know if I stopped to take a sip of water, which you guys got to give me some credit for that. I mean, that's got 45 minutes of just absolute ripping through it. Was very, very fun. About as much fun as I've had doing this solo, which is a good sign, right? Man, that's trending up, just like this team. I mean, I don't believe this team has won back-to-back games on the road, like, at all. So if they do that this weekend, given the circumstances this whole year, it's wild. And what I would say is, like, I hope you guys are having as much fun as you should be. Just, you can get caught up in, well, how far can we really go? You get one shot at this thing that we call life, and it is a blast to get to ride the wave every Sunday, at least for me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm not grizzled enough. But that's how I feel. So thank you guys for listening. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, it takes half a second, helps us out. If you're listening to Spotify and Apple or iHeart or anything like that, you can keep us locked and loaded there. Should have a fun announcement for you guys next week. But yeah, that'll do it for episode 33 of the Alec Lewis Show. Stay tuned later this week for another podcast.
Premiumbeat.com